Good evening, and welcome back to Dead Signal. Tonight, we dim the lights and journey into the darkest corners of the human psyche with a gothic double feature. We'll explore two chilling tales of minds unraveled, where guilt and isolation become horrors more terrifying than any monster lurking in the shadows. First, we delve into Edgar Allan Poe's masterpiece of psychological dread, The Black Cat. We follow a man, once gentle and kind, as his soul corrodes with drink and cruelty. His downfall begins with a single brutal act against his beloved pet, Pluto. But guilt is a stubborn stain, and it soon returns in the form of a second cat, a near-identical creature with one ghastly, white marking upon its chest. This isn't just a story about an animal. It's about the inescapable torment of a guilty conscience. As our narrator descends into paranoia and madness, he finds that the specter of his crime follows him, its single eye a constant burning reminder of the evil he has unleashed. He tries to silence it, to bury it, but some things refuse to stay dead. The story spirals towards a final, heart-stopping confrontation, proving that the most terrifying phantoms are the ones we create ourselves. Then, we'll claw our way out of the darkness with H.P. Lovecraft's The Outsider. This is a story of profound loneliness, told from the perspective of a creature who has known nothing but a decaying, lightless castle. For as long as it can remember, it has been utterly alone, its only company the cold stone and the endless night within its prison. Driven by a desperate, primal urge for light and companionship, it undertakes a perilous climb, scaling the crumbling tower that has been its entire world. After an arduous journey, it finally emerges into a strange new reality, our reality. It stumbles upon a castle filled with light and laughter, a festive gathering of people. But as it steps from the shadows, seeking connection, the joy turns to screams of terror. The partygoers flee in a panic, and it is in this moment of horrified rejection that the creature finally sees itself, catching its reflection for the very first time. The shocking truth it discovers is a fate far worse than the solitary grave it escaped, a revelation so soul-crushing it will make you question the very nature of monstrosity. Two souls, trapped by their own internal demons, one haunted by an act of malice, the other by a mere accident of birth. Join us tonight for a journey into guilt, madness, and horrifying self-discovery. Thank you for tuning in to Dead Signal. If you enjoy exploring the darker side of literature, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more tales from the beyond. We'll see you in the shadows. In a world forgotten by light, a lonely figure rises from the depths of decay. He's never seen his own reflection, never felt the sun, and tonight he dares to escape the darkness. But sometimes, the truth waiting in the light is far more horrifying than anything that lurks in the shadows. This is H.P. Lovecraft's The Outsider, a descent into madness, isolation, and the terrifying nature of identity. You're watching Dead Signal, where the shadows speak and the stories never rest in peace. If you love the strange, the gothic, and the unnerving, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and follow us across social media. All the links are waiting for you in the description below. Now, let's begin our journey into the unknown.
You might be wondering why my story makes you so uneasy, why you can't quite grasp what happened. I don't blame you. If my tale were simply about an escape, it would be just another adventure. But two things make it truly terrifying: the place I escaped from, and the fate that ultimately awaited me. It's only natural to want to know who you are, where you came from. But my own past was a collection of vague, shadowy impressions. I knew I had lived for a very long time in some monstrous, ancient building. There were no windows to the outside world, and everything had the color and smell of damp mold. Endless vaults and passages stretched into darkness, lit only by dim, constant flames, like a crypt. I remember the sound of underground rivers and the distant moan of wind whipping through ruined battlements. Figures moved through this place, but they weren't human. They were strange, gaunt, and shrunken, moving with slow, stealthy steps. They never spoke a word. I have no idea how long I was there. Months, maybe years. But eventually, a restless thirst for light and life began to consume me. I ached for the outside world, for the warmth of a sunrise, the sound of birds, the feeling of wind on my face. The life in that place was as pale and unfulfilling as a diet of ashes. I had to escape. The very thought gave me the courage to begin. I started exploring, testing every passage, every crumbling staircase, every door that led to nowhere. It was baffling at first, but finally, I found a stairway leading up. With every step I climbed, my breathing grew more eager, and the weight on my heart lifted. The climb was long, and I was terrified the silent inhabitants would hear me. My hands grew sore from gripping the cold stone, and my clothes were torn to shreds. But I kept going. At the top, I found a heavy door. I pushed, it resisted, and then, with a groan, it swung open. I found myself in a chamber with green-painted walls and windows that looked out onto an ancient garden. It was as if I'd stumbled upon a forgotten house, lost to time. Faded tapestries hung on the walls, and a thick layer of dust covered a long table. But sunlight streamed in, and the air was sweet with the sound of birds and the hum of bees. I approached a window, and when I reached for the sash, my hand recoiled. I had never seen real daylight before. It was more magnificent than I could have imagined. The colors, the vibrant green of the trees, the vast blue of the sky. It was like being born again. I stepped out into the garden. Flowers bowed in the gentle breeze. My long confinement had filled me with a reverence for all living things. When a small bird landed and pecked dust from my hand, I wept with joy. After exploring the garden, I moved on to other rooms, wandering through corridors of strange, antique design, full of sharp angles and shadowy corners. Eventually, I descended a grand staircase and found myself once again in gloom and despair. The world below was all shadows, filled with faint, uncertain things. For the first time, I understood the stark difference between the world above, full of light and life, and the underworld I came from, a ruin of foul odors and echoing silence. I wandered for hours, sometimes sitting down to weep, sometimes sleeping in old chambers, only to wake from dreams of my own death. In a small hall hung with portraits, I saw a face I knew I would never forget. It was small, thin, and yellow, like a skull with eyelids, and its eyes were like little black beads. But there was such a deep curiosity in them that I felt a strange sense of compassion. At last, I reached an open terrace, overlooking a road and a village below. I watched the people going about their lives and longed to be among them, but their faces held a strange, unsettling expression that I can't quite describe. I didn't have the power to call out to them. I barely knew how to speak. One evening, I decided to go down and mingle with the crowd. I hoped that human sympathy might grant me a new life. I found an old, tattered coat, mustered all my courage, and slipped past the shadowy figures of my home, finally reaching the town. What I saw was breathtaking. Old men and women walked the streets. Children laughed and played. Dogs ran about, and carriages passed by. It was a carnival of light, perfume, and sound. I couldn't believe such life was possible. As I walked through the streets, people stared, some with curiosity, others with suspicion. I tried to smile, but their eyes met mine with a cold hardness. I felt myself shrinking, bracing for something terrible. I reached a small tavern. The sight of men drinking together in a warm, low-ceilinged room moved me deeply. I stepped inside. Their faces turned toward me, first with rude curiosity, then with shock. A woman shrieked. Chairs toppled over. The room erupted into chaos as everyone scrambled to get away from me. I didn't understand why they were so terrified. They tried to grab me, but in the confusion, I escaped back into the street. A child stopped crying. A barking dog fled. Someone laughed. The people looked at me as if I were some kind of monster. I ran, fleeing into the woods. The trees seemed to bend over the path to meet me. My heart pounded in my chest, and my legs felt weak. I knew then that I was not made for the company of men. I wandered aimlessly until I found myself near a ruin with a graveyard and a cloister. I sank down on the steps, utterly alone. The solitude was crushing. For the first time, the thought that I might be an outcast forever descended upon me like a dark cloud. Later that night, the moon shone bright and cold. I looked up at it and felt that there was no place for me on this earth. I spent the night weeping under the open sky. Before dawn, I crept back to the edge of the village and entered the churchyard. I found a small chapel with an ancient iron door. The rusted latch shrieked as I lifted it. Inside, it was pitch black, but as my eyes adjusted, I saw a coffin. On top of it lay a skeleton wrapped in a shroud. A wave of sick compassion washed over me. I pitied this poor creature, who seemed as lonely as I was. I felt I had found a friend. Overcome with emotion, I sat down and wept. I wondered if there were others in the world as lonely and miserable as I was, and I resolved to find them. Searching the ruins, I found a narrow stairway leading down. I descended into a subterranean hall, and there I saw the most incredible thing. A gaunt, pale figure with long hair and nails and eyes that glowed like embers. It was not a man nor any creature I had ever seen. There was a hollow in its chest, as if an organ had been eaten away, but it was still alive. It moved slowly, painfully. It looked at me, and its expression held a sorrow so deep it made me weep again. I took its hand and tried to offer some comfort, but it only looked at me and sighed. We sat together for a while. Then, as if recalling a past life, it tried to move away, but it was too weak. I followed it to an old gate that led back to the surface. We stood together under the stars. Soon, a man saw us and fled in terror. I could feel my companion's shame as it looked at the ground. We parted ways. I went toward the village, and it returned to the ruins. I never saw it again. It's a terrible thing to admit, but as I reflected on my past, I realized that the inhabitants of the place I came from were just like that creature I had pitied. Then, the truth hit me with soul-shattering force. The pity I had felt was for a being of my own kind. That pitiful skeleton, that sorrowful creature, it was a reflection of myself. The horror of my own origin, the knowledge that I could never be one of the living, was unbearable. I went back to the village and looked at the faces of the people again. They seemed even sterner than before. I knew in my heart there was no place for me among them. So I fled, just as the creature I pitied had fled. Months later, wretched and defeated, I managed to sneak back into that haunted place. I descended the ancient stairway into the abyss below the world. I had done what no man had done before. I wandered those corridors of horror until I found the door back to the world. I forced it open and stepped out. The people fled at my approach, screaming that they had seen a monster. They called for the guards. I didn't wait, but as I lost myself among the hills, I heard a hateful voice call my name. I had been discovered. I cannot tell you what happened next. I only know they seized me, dragged me to the church, and as a crowd gathered, they burned me as if I were some evil thing. I remember all of this with a twisted sense of horror, for I was among living men, yet I was not one of them. Now you have my story. Don't be surprised that you are puzzled. The meaning is simple. There are places where we are not meant to live, and when we are from those places, we can never find our home among our fellow beings. If you have any pity in your heart, you will be merciful to the lonely. Thank you for listening to my story. If you found this tale intriguing, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more explorations into the shadows.
For the most wild, yet most homely narrative which I am about to pen, I neither expect nor solicit belief. Mad indeed would I be to expect it in a case where my very senses reject their own evidence. Yet mad am I not, and very surely do I not dream. But tomorrow I die, and today I would unburden my soul. My immediate purpose is to place before the world, plainly, a series of mere household events. In their consequences, these events have terrified, have tortured, have destroyed me. To me, they have presented little but horror. From my infancy, I was noted for the docility and humanity of my disposition. My tenderness of heart was so conspicuous as to make me the jest of my companions. I was especially fond of animals, and my parents indulged me with a great variety of pets. With these I spent most of my time, and I was never so happy as when feeding and caressing them. There is something in the unselfish and self-sacrificing love of a brute which goes directly to the heart of him who has had frequent occasion to test the paltry friendship of mere man. I married early, and was happy to find in my wife a disposition not uncongenial with my own. Observing my partiality for domestic pets, she lost no opportunity of procuring those of the most agreeable kind. We had birds, goldfish, a fine dog, rabbits, a small monkey, and a cat. This latter was a remarkably large and beautiful animal, entirely black and sagacious to an astonishing degree. My wife, who at heart was not a little tinctured with superstition, often alluded to the ancient popular notion, which regarded all black cats as witches in disguise. Pluto, this was the cat's name, was my favorite pet and playmate. I alone fed him, and he attended me wherever I went about the house. It was even with difficulty that I could prevent him from following me through the streets. Our friendship lasted for several years, during which my general temperament and character, through the instrumentality of the fiend intemperance, had, I blush to confess it, experienced a radical alteration for the worse. I grew, day by day, more moody, more irritable, more regardless of the feelings of others. I suffered myself to use intemperate language to my wife. At length, I even offered her personal violence. My pets, of course, were made to feel the change. I not only neglected, but ill-used them. For Pluto, however, I still retained sufficient regard to restrain me from maltreating him. But my disease grew upon me, for what disease is like alcohol? And at length even Pluto, who was now becoming old, and consequently somewhat peevish, even Pluto began to experience the effects of my ill temper. One night, returning home much intoxicated, I fancied that the cat avoided my presence. I seized him, when, in his fright, he inflicted a slight wound upon my hand with his teeth. The fury of a demon instantly possessed me. I knew myself no longer. My original soul seemed at once to take its flight from my body, and a more than fiendish malevolence, kin-nurtured, thrilled every fiber of my frame. I took from my waistcoat pocket a penknife, opened it, grasped the poor beast by the throat, and deliberately cut one of its eyes from the socket. I blush, I burn, I shudder, while I pen the damnable atrocity. When reason returned with the morning, I experienced a sentiment half of horror, half of remorse for the crime. But it was, at best, a feeble and equivocal feeling. I again plunged into excess, and soon drowned in wine all memory of the deed. In the meantime, the cat slowly recovered. The socket of the lost eye presented a frightful appearance, but he no longer appeared to suffer any pain. He went about the house as usual, but, as might be expected, fled in extreme terror at my approach. I had so much of my old heart left as to be at first grieved by this evident dislike. But this feeling soon gave place to irritation, and then came, as if to my final and irrevocable overthrow, the spirit of perverseness, who has not 100 times found himself committing a vile or a silly action, for no other reason than because he knows he should not. This spirit of perverseness, I say, came to my final overthrow. It was this unfathomable longing of the soul to vex itself, to do wrong for the wrong sake only, that urged me to continue the injury I had inflicted upon the unoffending brute. One morning, in cool blood, I slipped a noose about its neck and hung it to the limb of a tree, hung it with tears streaming from my eyes and with the bitterest remorse at my heart, hung it because I knew that it had loved me and because I felt it had given me no reason of offense. On the night of the day on which this cruel deed was done, I was aroused from sleep by the cry of fire. The whole house was blazing. My wife, a servant, and myself made our escape from the conflagration. The destruction was complete. My entire worldly wealth was swallowed up. The day after the fire, I visited the ruins. The walls had fallen in, with one exception. This was a compartment wall against which had rested the head of my bed. A dense crowd was collected, examining a portion of it with eager attention. The words strange and singular excited my curiosity. I approached and saw, as if graven in bas-relief upon the white surface, the figure of a gigantic cat. There was a rope about the animal's neck. My wonder and my terror were extreme. The cat, I remembered, had been hung in a garden adjacent to the house. Upon the alarm of fire, someone must have cut the animal from the tree and thrown it through a window into my chamber to arouse me. The falling of other walls had compressed the victim into the freshly spread plaster, which, with the flames and the ammonia from the carcass, had then accomplished the portraiture as I saw it. For months, I could not rid myself of the phantasm of the cat, and I began to regret the loss of the animal. I started looking for another pet of the same species. One night, as I sat, half stupefied in a den of more than infamy, my attention was drawn to a black object reposing on a large cask of gin. I approached and touched it with my hand. It was a black cat, a very large one, fully as large as Pluto, and closely resembling him. in every respect but one. Pluto had not a white hair upon his body, but this cat had a large, although indefinite, splotch of white covering nearly the whole of its breast. Upon my touching him, he immediately arose, purred loudly, rubbed against my hand, and appeared delighted with my notice. This, then, was the very creature of which I was in search. When I prepared to go home, the animal evinced a disposition to accompany me. It domesticated itself at once and became a great favorite with my wife. For my own part, I soon found a dislike to it arising within me. Its evident fondness for me rather disgusted and annoyed me. By slow degrees, these feelings of disgust rose into the bitterness of hatred. What added to my hatred was the discovery the next morning that, like Pluto, it also had been deprived of one of its eyes. With my aversion to this cat, however, its partiality for me seemed to increase. It followed my footsteps with a pertinacity I can hardly make you comprehend. Whenever I sat, it would crouch beneath my chair or spring upon my knees, covering me with its loathsome caresses. If I arose to walk, it would get between my feet and nearly throw me down. At such times, although I longed to destroy it with a blow, I was held back by a memory of my former crime, but chiefly by absolute dread of the beast. My wife had called my attention more than once to the character of the mark of white hair. This mark, though large, had been originally very indefinite, but by slow degrees it had at length assumed a rigorous distinctness of outline. It was now the representation of an object that I shuddered to name. It was now the image of a hideous, of a ghastly thing, of the gallows. O mournful and terrible engine of horror and of crime! Alas, neither by day nor by night knew I the blessing of rest any more. During the latter, I started hourly from dreams of unutterable fear to find the hot breath of the thing upon my face, and its vast weight incumbent eternally upon my heart. Beneath the pressure of torments such as these, the feeble remnant of the good within me succumbed. Evil thoughts became my sole intimates. One day, my wife accompanied me on some household errand into the cellar of the old building our poverty compelled us to inhabit. The cat followed me down the steep stairs and, nearly throwing me headlong, exasperated me to madness. Uplifting an axe, I aimed a blow at the animal, but this blow was arrested by the hand of my wife. Goaded by the interference into a rage more than demoniacal, I withdrew my arm from her grasp and buried the axe in her brain. She fell dead upon the spot without a groan. This hideous murder accomplished, I set myself to the task of concealing the body. I determined to wall it up in the cellar. In one of the walls was a projection caused by a false chimney that had been filled up. I made no doubt that I could readily displace the bricks, insert the corpse, and wall the whole up as before. By means of a crowbar, I easily dislodged the bricks, and having carefully deposited the body against the inner wall, I relaid the whole structure as it originally stood. When I had finished, I felt satisfied that all was right. The wall did not present the slightest appearance of having been disturbed. My next step was to look for the beast which had been the cause of so much wretchedness, but it had vanished, alarmed at the violence of my anger. For one night, at least, I soundly and tranquilly slept. I slept even with the burden of murder upon my soul. The second and third day passed, and still my tormentor came not. I breathed as a freeman. My happiness was supreme. Upon the fourth day of the assassination, a party of the police came unexpectedly to the house and proceeded to make a rigorous investigation. Secure in the inscrutability of my place of concealment, I felt no embarrassment whatever. They left no nook or corner unexplored. At length, they descended into the cellar. My heart beat calmly, as that of one who slumbers in innocence. The police were satisfied and prepared to depart. The glee at my heart was too strong to be restrained. I burned to say one word by way of triumph. "Gentlemen," I said at last, as the party ascended the steps, "I delight to have allayed your suspicions. I wish you all health. By the by, gentlemen, this is a very well-constructed house. These walls— Are you going, gentlemen? These walls are solidly put together, and here, through the mere frenzy of bravado, I rapped heavily with a cane upon that very portion of the brickwork behind which stood the corpse of the wife of my bosom. But may God shield me from the fangs of the arch-fiend. No sooner had the reverberation of my blows sunk into silence than I was answered by a voice from within the tomb. A cry, at first muffled and broken, like the sobbing of a child, and then quickly swelling into one long and loud and continuous scream, a howl, a wailing shriek, half of horror and half of triumph. For one instant, the party upon the stairs remained motionless. In the next, a dozen stout arms were toiling at the wall. It fell bodily. The corpse, already greatly decayed, stood erect before the eyes of the spectators. Upon its head, with red extended mouth and solitary eye of fire, sat the hideous beast whose craft had seduced me into murder, and whose informing voice had consigned me to the hangman. I had walled the monster up within the tomb. Thank you for joining me on this descent into madness. If you found yourself captivated by Poe's chilling tale, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more classic horror stories. Let us know in the comments which tale you'd like to hear next. Stay safe and see you again soon.